Wake up, Link.
For a very long time, going all the way back to the 90s when I first started playing Zelda games, I've been a massive fan of the franchise. The creativity and world of Zelda has always been one of my favorites in gaming, with A Link to the Past being one of my favorite games of all time. But for various reasons, and mostly me just being an idiot, I skipped out on Breath of the Wild when it released back in 2017. Now, I wasn't sure what to expect when going into Breath of the Wild for the first time since I have somehow managed to stay spoiler-free all these years, but what I found was a truly unique open-world game with some incredible design choices and also some not so great. But with that said, let me go ahead and dive into the game, starting with the opening area. When I first crawled out of the Shrine of Resurrection and looked out over Hyrule, I was instantly captivated by the world, and felt like this is what you would have expected from the original Zelda game if it was 3D. It's what I always dreamed of having, this expansive world that had endless amounts of content with iconic locations like Death Mountain to explore. Surprisingly though, my first hour or two of the game, I actually wasn't sure if I liked it. From the controls, the crafting, and to just the general blandness of the opening area made me feel like this might not be that great. But once I got into the flow of combat, explored a few shrines, climbed a couple towers, and did some side quests, I found myself unable to put the controller down. The biggest reason I believe I kind of went down this weird path with the game is because I wasn't prepared for the game to basically give you all the tools at the start. Over the course of basically all Zelda games, you build up this arsenal for Link over time, but here you have everything, and because of that, you don't really know how to properly use any of it. You might know the basics, but the actual creativity that this game throws at the player is unreal, and only something you learn over time by playing for hours upon hours. Which is why I love the shrines so much. Since you already have everything, they're completely unpredictable, and you never know what tools you're going to have to use to complete them. Not to mention, even if the developers expected you to solve some of these puzzles in a specific way, there's a good chance that you could complete these in a completely unattended way because of all the tools you have, which is absolutely brilliant to me. But I will say some of the shrines are just too easy, and at times, I really felt like there was too many of them. It almost feels like they could have cut the amount of shrines in half, but made them a few rooms bigger to just make the more boring ones a little more interesting, and honestly, the entire world probably should have been smaller. I loved exploring these lands and finding various secrets while checking out some beautiful landscapes, but there is so much bloat that feels completely unnecessary that if it was removed, the game would honestly just be better. Seriously, if the map was like 10% smaller, it would have made the moment-to-moment gameplay that much better while exploring. Not to mention, I feel a little more detail could have went into some more areas, since some parts of the world, the game looks incredibly detailed, and other parts, it's just incredibly bland. But going back to the subject of gameplay, I really love the combat in this game. Link feels fantastic to control when fighting, and with the endless amount of options at your disposal, there's a crazy amount of ways to dispose of enemies how you see fit. But I will say, why does everything break every 5 seconds? When you have combat that I would argue is the best in the Zelda series, at least when it comes to the 3D games that is this fun, I don't understand what they were thinking with the durability being so low on everything. Like, I don't care that stuff breaks. I care how fast it breaks. It's just not fun to me, and wish they would have slightly done something different, like you could find a shrine that for the next 12 hours of in-game time, nothing you use can break but your health gets halved. Or make use of the crafting feature where you could cook a durability elixir for a weapon that increases its hits if you used it before it breaks. Or even giving the Master Sword even less damage, but it doesn't run out of energy, that way you don't have to wait 10 minutes to use it again. That way it's just a weapon that can endlessly be used, but it's not OP for anything outside of Ganon. Literally anything like that would have been great to me.
Forgive me. I think you are now ready. Ready to hear what happened 100 years ago.
Now, moving on to the main story quests and the Divine Beasts, I am very mixed on these, starting with the Zoras and Divine Beast Ruda. For me personally, this was my favorite stretch I played in the entire game. From the moment you meet Sidon and you begin following the river up the mountain to get to the Zora's domain, learning some of the history of Link and Mipha, going to get the shock arrows, and fighting your first Lionel, which let me just say are extremely fun to fight and is probably one of the best enemies in Zelda's history. Then taking on the Divine Beast in the lake, going through the dungeon, and fighting Waterblight Ganon. I loved all of it, and the same applies to the Gerudo Desert and storyline leading up to Divine Beast Nabarros, with you battling through the Yiga clan hideout to get the Thunder Helm. Not to mention, the Thunderblight Ganon fight inside of Nabarros is probably the hardest boss fight in the game, which isn't necessarily saying much since Zelda games in general tend to be pretty easy, but I found that fight to be at least somewhat of a challenge. Now for the other two Divine Beasts, let me say this. Divine Beast Rudania's dungeon was probably my favorite in the game. I really enjoyed the layout of it, and progressing through it just felt satisfying. Unfortunately, that is where it ends. The story build up to the Divine Beast with the Gorons is so uninspiring, and the initial battle to get inside of the Divine Beast is also lackluster compared to all the other ones that made this part of the game my least favorite outside of the opening of the game. They did Death Mountain and the Gorons dirty in this one as far as I'm concerned. As for the Rito people and Divine Beast Medal, isn't much better. The actual fight to get into the Divine Beast and the dungeon itself is amazing, not to mention the Windblight Ganon fight was probably my favorite fight of the four. I just wish the build up to all of it was better. You basically show up to the Rito village, talk for a second, shoot a few targets at a range with a character you have no build up with, then you're off to the races. It's just not very fleshed out to me, and it's the reason why the Ritos and the Gorons parts of the game were the low points for me, which leads me back to the Ganon fights and the four beasts. They are fun, but aesthetically, the bosses are super boring and very uninspiring. One of the best parts about Zelda games are the boss designs and how the battles with them play out in very unique ways. In this, you can basically fight the four Ganon fights exactly the same way. Now, I know I said you can be super creative with the combat, and that's true, but there is just something about how past Zelda games made you use the key item you got in a dungeon to fight the boss in a unique way that is just lost here. That build up and excitement of how that tool you have is going to be useful in a boss fight is one of the best feelings ever, and I do sorely miss that in Breath of the Wild, since after fighting the first Ganon and saying his name, you already know what the next three are basically going to look like and pretty much play like. Though I will say the abilities you get from each Divine Beast champion is incredibly useful. Definitely when it comes to Rivali's Gale. That basically breaks the game in so many ways and I love it. Which leads me to my next little complaint, stamina. I pretty much focused on raising my health for the entire playthrough of the game, but towards the end, I finally upgraded my stamina, and all I could think about was how this just makes the game 1,000 times more fun. It never really hit me how inconvenient your stamina bar can be at the default level, but after that first upgrade, all I could think about was how that should have been the default stamina bar from the start. It doesn't break the core mechanics of the game, but that little extra stamina goes a long way of making the game just better, and if I were to replay through Breath of the Wild, I would 100% focus solely on stamina, because honestly, it doesn't really pay off to invest in health. Outside of getting the Master Sword, you take so much damage from hits, you really don't need a whole lot of health because it doesn't serve too much of a purpose. Then on top of that, why in the world is there 900 Korok seeds in this world? It's fun searching for them and getting upgrades to your storage for it, but that just seems a little excessive, and whoever came up with that is a sadistic evil bastard. Then, since I'm just throwing out the kitchen sink here, I think the horse controls are not great. I love the idea of catching your horse and taming it, but after controlling a horse in a game like Elden Ring, this feels terrible, and those controls were really felt during the part where you're trying to board Nabarros using the sand seals. With that said, let's switch over to the story of the game and talk about something a little more positive.
Link, save yourself. Go. I'll be fine. Don't worry about me. Run!
For starters, I'm glad the game has voice acting. Sometimes you don't realize how much more impactful story moments are until you have a voice actor showing you the error of your ways. and I love the cutscenes in this game, especially the memories you recover with Link between him and Zelda. Seeing how their relationship grew over time is incredible and made every second of those moments impactful, and just drove me to try to find every single one of those, especially when it comes to moments like Link's last stand against the Guardians or seeing the champions get redeemed after 100 years. Now, when it comes to Ganon, he felt so underwhelming as a villain in this game. It's just like he's there because there has to be something evil for Link to fight. Now, I will say the fight with Calamity Ganon is cool, and I love his design, but in terms of going through Hyrule Castle and the second phase of the fight with Ganon were just not that fun to me. I was ready to go through a challenging dungeon in Hyrule Castle. Instead, I just Rivali's Galed my way up to Ganon, and that was it. And the second phase fight was an interactive cutscene basically. So overall, the climax of the game was a bit of a letdown and felt like it was a missed opportunity to really nail that old school Zelda experience. Would have been great if you had to venture deep into Hyrule Castle to get the Bow of Light from like the castle's treasury for the final showdown, using all the tools at Link's disposal to get it. But that doesn't stop me from loving this game, because Breath of the Wild is full of great ideas, crazy attention to detail, and was a huge step into a different style of game for the Zelda franchise. Even with some generic open world elements and somewhat boring enemy variety, I'm looking at you endless repetitive mini bosses in the open world, the formula that made past Zelda games so great is definitely here, and with this being a test run of how that formula can evolve, I fully expect Tears of the Kingdom to be a massive step up from Breath of the Wild, which despite its flaws, it's hard not to consider it a masterpiece, definitely from a technical standpoint. I didn't run into a single glitch the entire time I played the game, just a few moments of frame drops, and well, it's the Switch, so that's just expected, but jokes aside, I really do hope Tears of the Kingdom takes the next step in improving this experience. Safe to say, I'm looking forward to seeing that for myself when I review the game, definitely since I feel like I've only scratched the surface of what's possible in Breath of the Wild. For now though, I'm just glad I took the time to play Breath of the Wild. Thanks for watching everyone.